it looks like shit when you download it.
Really?
I forget. Can you curse on this?
Yes, you
All
can.
right, okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
And I'm going to go ahead and call Andrew as well, just to make sure he's on the line with us. On the line.
Mine's not working at all. I don't know if you even have anything on.
No, I actually unplugged that one because I was going to have you just plug into this amp right here like we did last week. Okay. I think it works better than that one.
What I would do is, I think a lot of your bounce is coming from the ceiling.
Yeah. And
put some tiles on the ceiling.
And also, I have a bunch too. Like, I have a bunch of old ones that were all just spread out weird because I thought 12 square feet was a lot bigger than what it actually was.
You know what my friend Dakota did, actually, is he has a light like this in his room that he built a studio in.
Did he take the
And he
cover
took
off?
Well, he took a cloth that was kind of heat resistant, and he kind of made a 4-pin so it dropped down, so it diffused the light, but it also absorbed a lot of the sound too.
That makes sense.
So that's something that you could do, is like put almost a sheet up there.
And then just like thumbtack them to the ceiling.
Yep, just thumbtack it right up there.
We are live. Nice. Good job, Shane.
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
So yes, if that's okay. He asked if I was calling his phone.
Where's this live at?
It's on the Magic Squirrel Network.
I always go to Juice in the morning to look for it, and then I'm like, I'm an idiot. It's on Magic Squirrel.
Yeah.
I want to watch that Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Dude, it's going to be good. And I think we're going to be on one of his episodes where we talk about Jean-Claude Van Damme movies.
Because I know a ridiculous amount about Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Why is it not loading? I was going to try to like follow on the computer so that if I see comments and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Because they disappear off of the Mevo, don't they? Like when they
pop up
and then they just disappear.
I usually catch them, though.
Okay.
I think the last one I saw was when BJ just said, I love Shane. That's all he said.
Whatever, this fucking thing.
I'm here. That's all that's important. But it doesn't say who it is.
All right. Last thing, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, that's weird that it, like, we just got a comment, but it doesn't say who it is.
I found the Facebook group Bevo Stream has been screwy, so I've just been going to YouTube.
There we go. Christy Avery, I'm here. That's all that's important. And then Spangle with a lot of exclamation points.
That would be Christy. That's my super fan.
All right, we're going to call Andrew.
I wish I had fans.
I know.
You do have fans. You have probably more fans than I do, actually, unfortunately. And
it's usually how it goes with the
it's
co-host.
I don't know if I'm using this word right, but ironic because he's the one that wants to be famous. We got three people.
Hey, what's up, man?
Hey, how's it going, Andrew?
Good. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you guys hear him as well?
I can hear him fine.
And
Yep.
Can you hear all three of us? So this is me, and then go ahead, Shane.
This is Shane.
Hey, this is Chris.
Alrighty, I'm good.
Good.
Cool.
All right.
We got 5 people on the old Facebook
Yeah,
Live
it's because
here.
we've got the famous Chris Spangle in here. That's why.
Hell yeah.
All right, so Andrew, we haven't started recording yet. I'm going to introduce everybody, and then we'll go ahead and get started from there. Okay.
All right, just let me know when to start recording.
All right, we are. You don't have to record unless you're wanting to save it for yourself as well.
Oh, okay, you've got me.
Yeah, I've got you.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
All right, we're starting in about 5 seconds.
Choosing them.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to Juice in the Morning. This is a exciting episode. It's going to be a little bit different than what we've had the last couple weeks that are kind of just been going off the rails, getting into really crazy subjects such as ass eating and all that stuff. But to my left is the co-host that I love to have on the podcast. Shane, how are you doing today, man?
Pretty good, man. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Did a lot of physical manual labor this weekend.
Yeah,
so,
the old deck looks good.
yeah. As soon as they got here, I wanted to show them my deck.
It was a huge deck.
One of the nicer decks I've seen.
It's very glossy.
And the first thing that I wanted to kind of throw out there, you may know our guest that's joining us, obviously from being on the Juice in the Morning podcast before, but he's also from the Bob and Tom. He does the Nooner with Josh Arnold. We are Libertarians podcast, and way too many other fucking things to the list. How you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good. I mean, you're a busy man, so
I'm very busy.
So I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come do the podcast.
Absolutely. It's always fun when I come here. You have a very fun show and a very nice deck.
Appreciate that.
We'll take
Thank
it.
you.
We'll take it.
Thank you very much. And then on the phone, actually, we have a man that has reignited my passion for history with the Monday American podcast. How are you doing today, Andrew?
Appreciate that. That's too much of a compliment. I'm doing good.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I want to say about Andrew's podcast, The Monday American, if you are a fan of the Hardcore History with Dan Carlin, I would like to say that I feel like he does a very similar thing, but also I like the spin that he puts on it. I think it comes from your political stances, and that's really the whole point of this episode today, was to kind of get you on here with Chris and talk about the history of the Libertarian Party.
I'll do the best I can to offer some actual good content for you.
Yeah, and just the last thing about the Monday American, he's got multiple series revolving around the Civil War, American Revolution, 9/11, and just a bunch of other stuff as well. Vietnam War as well, I think.
All things that are pretty exciting when it comes to history, I feel like.
Yeah, and he puts a lot of effort and time into doing it. So I appreciate you being on the podcast with us today. And I want to just go on to the next thing, which is I want everybody to know that the Married with Children podcast had me on and sent me an awesome shirt.
Sweet.
So the people on the live can see it. They are great podcast based out of the Midwest, and they had a woman on there, Victoria Schremen, that participates in the Highland Games.
Ooh.
How do you guys feel about the Highland Games?
That's the log tossing.
Oh, log
and
tossing.
Damn.
You're wearing a kilt. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, as someone that repeatedly gets mistaken for a lumberjack, I'm all about it.
You're more lumbersexual, let's be honest.
I'm good with that too. Anything with sexual in it and lumberjack, I'm good.
And they're an awesome podcast based out of the Midwest. I just wanted to give them a shout out for having me on, and just check them out if you guys get a chance. But let's dive into the history of the Libertarian Party, or libertarianism, I guess, is what I wanted to get into. And the first thing is how do you think things got started, Chris? And then I want to kind of get your take as well, Andrew.
Well, it's a long process, and people often mistakenly think that libertarianism exists exclusively within the Libertarian Party, which it does not. There are even libertarian Democrats. There are socialist libertarians. Yeah. But the basis of libertarianism, let's define that word first and foremost. It is the foundation of an aggression principle, and that is what our parents taught us. Don't hit people. Don't steal people's stuff. Don't lie. And if the government, by extension, for instance, it wouldn't be legal for me to come and steal your computer. Yeah. It wouldn't be even morally right for the two of us, the majority, to agree that that computer is mine. It wouldn't be morally agreeable to say, I get your computer, but I'll replace it with an Etch-a-Sketch. And that's often what the government does. It's a collection of individuals, but because it has a majority, we've granted it this force, and the use of force by the government is something that libertarians disagree with. Right. And so we oppose the initiation of force to achieve social and political goals. Now, this is, I think, fundamentally human and exists within every individual. And it has not been a part of history for a very long time, right? Because the history of government and humanity has been tribal initially, and then we moved into, kingships and more of the regal nature of government, especially in the West, and then the city-state. And now we're still in the existence of the city-state, a little more global than just your basic city-state like the United States government and France and Great Britain. And where I think we're headed is a more libertarian society. As technology grows and affords us more ability, you will see more individuals taking back their personal power to make their decisions for themselves, especially as we realize government is too slow, too cumbersome, and too obtrusive to actually be something that works in a good way.
Yeah.
Now, the modern libertarian movement, it starts around the time of the founders. Okay. The founding fathers were very libertarian. I am a constitutional libertarian. Okay.
Yeah.
I believe that the Constitution is, while it still exists to have some government force, it is very liberal in terms of allowing people personal freedom, economic freedom, and they were certainly, especially with slavery, not perfect in their execution in that time period. But obviously, we've moved so far towards personal freedom that it's time to give it a shot.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the modern Libertarian Party starts in the and as an extension of the Barry Goldwater campaign in 1964, who ran against Lyndon Johnson. And Barry Goldwater was very personally, he was fiscally conservative, socially liberal in a lot of ways, and very libertarian. And he lost, and that spawned the creation of National Review, the Ronald Reagan Revolution, the Libertarian Movement. And when Nixon won in 72, he took us off of the gold standard.
Yeah.
And when he did that, a group of libertarians who are very steeped in the Austrian economic school of economics, they were outraged by this. And so a man named David Nolan started the Libertarian Party in 1972. They held their first convention in 1974. I think it started, it was 72, I believe. The first election, you may have to fact check me on this, but the first election was 76 with John Hospers and Tony Nathan. She's actually the first female to win an electoral college vote.
Oh, wow.
And John Hospers was openly gay, and he's the first gay man to win an electoral vote. And from then on, it's been growing, and I mean, it's the fastest growing political party in modern America.
Right. And Andrew, I'd like to get your side of things, because I feel like with your knowledge of history and everything, wouldn't libertarianism be something that's been around for quite a bit of time, but is it just kind of coming to the forefront now?
Yeah, I mean, I first of all, Chris, that was a phenomenal historical backdrop of libertarianism, and I couldn't agree more that the founding fathers were essentially the first libertarians, because the way I see it, libertarianism started when we were being encroached on by the British government repeatedly, and it would increase in magnitude and strength each time. And they basically, they declared their independence from government in that way, and they wrote this constitution that was supposed to protect your individual freedoms and liberties. And that's how I see libertarianism getting its real start.
And the question that I wanted to address both of you guys with, and Andrew, feel free to answer first. What do you think that the founding people would think of us today? Like I feel like the liberties that we give up voluntarily, like our privacy and issues like that. How do you feel about that?
I don't think they'd be happy. I think they'd be the most disappointed in Congress and the increase of the executive branch of powers term to term.
Yeah. How about you, Chris? What do you think?
I think they'd be happy in some respects and greatly disappointed in others. I think in the personal freedom, many of the founders were abolitionists. They just knew that in the signing of the Constitution to form the Union to make this work, they had the 3/5 compromise, which is obviously a moral failing. And I think
what is the 3/5 compromise?
The 3/5 compromise basically said that black people were 3/5 of a person.
Oh, so like they were getting like 3/5 of a vote?
Of a person in their count toward their statehood. Okay,
That's
in
insane.
terms of their population. And it was a compromise for many different reasons, but it was it wouldn't have been ratified had it not been in existence. And because Southern plantation owners knew that if they made slaves a full person, then they would be overrun and overwhelmed. They'd have to have the right to vote. They'd be able to own weapons. And so it just wasn't going. Obviously, when you have local tyrants like slaveholders, they don't want to arm and empower their slaves.
Right.
So I think to have a black president elected in Barack Obama, I think many people like Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, I think probably Thomas Jefferson would have been greatly pleased with that development. The amount of personal freedom where people in America, we have a lot of personal freedom. We are sitting here on this podcast. I do 2 podcasts a week, constantly dinging the government for many different things. I'm in no fear of having my door kicked in or being poisoned with plutonium like I would be in Russia.
Right.
So we have a lot of those freedoms. But in terms of economic freedom, the deficit, and especially our militarism, the beginning of the Cold War and the beginning of the growth of the military state where we are intervening in other countries, I think that first and foremost would have been the most grievous thing to the Founding Fathers, which is ironic because Republicans are the most militaristic and hold on to the Founding Fathers the most. James Madison basically said that war is the beginning of the end. It's the growth of the state. It enables every bad aspect of the state to grow.
Right.
So I think in terms of interventionism and economics, they would have been greatly disappointing.
Shane, how do you think you would fare in a different country? Do you feel like you'd be able to get along pretty well? Like if you had to be forced to live somewhere else?
I don't think I would do too well. I think I'm kind of a person that doesn't do well with any kind of I don't know what you want to call
Forced action.
And I was going to ask, so do you think our first like times of us really policing the world came about because of communism?
Yeah, so the history, there's a great documentary series by Oliver Stone on Netflix called The Untold or The Secret History of the United States, and it really outlines this pretty well, as well as a writer named Chalmers Johnson in a book called The Sorrows of Empire, where we didn't want to go into World War I and World War II. I mean, people like Charles Lindbergh were in jail for opposing World War II. But he had a very strong movement to not go into World War II. And then Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower really pushed the theory of the domino theory, where
once one country decides that they're communists, it's going to be a domino effect of all the countries kind of throughout Asia.
That just blew me away. I didn't know that you would know that because I had no idea.
Well, I mean, in this time period, it was like really popular with the fascism, and basically the United States was scared that our biggest fear was that communism was going to spread throughout Eurasia.
Well, here's why.
Indochina.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah. The Americans had flirted with colonialism in Cuba, Puerto Rico, which still is suffering the effects after Maria, despite being an American protector, Honolulu, Hawaii, Philippines, whatever. But it wasn't like the other states. So after World War II, when the empire, the Commonwealth of Britain, France, they just didn't have the ability to maintain all of their former territories because they had been completely wiped out. And they had taken all of the resources out of these countries and had basically robbed them of their wealth and enslaved these countries. You had a massive firestorm on your hands. And so when you have companies like the East India Tea Company coming in and robbing India of all of their wealth, the locals go, capitalism is bad. What's the alternative? It's communism. And so communism started to move into these other countries. And America said, well, we can't have the balance get thrown off so much in the world that all of the world is communist except for the West. So we need to balance this out. And that's when America stepped in to fill the void left by Britain and France.
I might be wrong on this, but like the Marshall Plan, wasn't that something that was along the lines of that? It's kind of similar to what we did with Afghanistan. So after you go to a country and war happens and their country is in like disarray or whatever, we kind of give them some money to help them rebuild and rebuild things. Yeah. And then so that like threats like ISIS don't come back in and take over that area, kind of similar to maybe what's happening in Syria right now. Yeah.
Yep.
So
well, if I could interject really quickly,
I was just about to ask you, Andrew. I want to get your thoughts on that as well as us. How you feel about us policing the other parts of the world?
So I don't disagree with anything Chris said. I tend to pull the America World Police back, the founding of that back a little bit further, but more so on the Bretton Woods Agreement. So after World War II, Europe was destroyed, and there was no way to guarantee trade, the safety of trade routes in Europe, because there's a lot of piratism. It was just the Bretton Woods Agreement essentially was all the nations coming together to say who's going to ensure that we can keep, essentially a world police to keep things in order while we rebuild Europe. America stepped into that role to say we're still together. We don't have a single bit of land damage over here in America. We can make sure that things are going the way they should until we get everything rebuilt. And we never really stepped out of that role. So that's really where I put the biggest part of it in. And of course, that did transition into the domino theory from there when communists came around in the Marshall Plan. That's a good addition there, Shane. I'm proud of you.
Thank you. I was also going to ask, at what point do you think that we were scared of those kind of threats and stuff, so we did start policing the world. At one point do you think that we started policing the world for our own good, as opposed to
were we overstepping our boundaries where we
because
shouldn't be?
at some point people, you hear people say we're only over there for oil and blah, those kind of things, and I just kind of, where do you guys stand with that point?
That's a difficult question to answer, I guess. I mean, it in my eyes, it gets stronger each time. It doesn't start off just right away being there out of only selfish interest, but the Korean War, I guess, would be the first one where you can really point your finger at, like, we really had no business being there.
Yeah, we had drawn the lines in Korea. Dean Rusk, who went on to be Secretary of State, was an Army staffer, and he drew it along the 38th parallel in what Russia and the United States and Britain were carving up. Sykes-Picot in the Middle East, where we drew the lines of Israel and Syria and Lebanon. I mean, the West drew these countries in all of these different in the world, and it'd be like the three of us sitting down and going, where good border would be in Korea, having never been to Korea. Exactly. So that is a great point of misery, post World War I, post World War II, where the West basically determines for what they considered lesser cultures. We were civilizing them. So that imperialist mentality was a huge part of why these countries are still poor, why these countries are still abused. I think where we really became unmoored, I remember growing up in the 90s and following politics in Bosnia and the airstrikes against Al-Qaeda and these other countries, and there still was some hand-wringing over intervening in other countries. It was Iraq and moving into Iraq, and then we've basically passed these two laws called the Authorization of the Use of Military Force, where it gives a blank check to the president to conduct wars in other countries in 2001 and 2002. I would say that's probably the Rubicon, okay? That is where we crossed the line from trying to pretend that we had the world's interest at heart into...
And they basically gave us, as Americans, they're telling us, this is why we're doing it, but come to find out, there's probably an alternative, whatever you want to call it.
It's a slippery slope. It started 100 years ago, and then it ends up where, man, if we leave Syria, there's bad consequences, and then everybody goes, oh no, bad consequences, not bad consequences. But when you really listen to what the bad consequences are, like in Syria, for instance, if we leave Syria, it will leave a vacuum and it will be bad. Well, we have 2,000 troops there, and their main job is basically setting up local governments. Somebody else can fulfill that role. We're not going to create a vacuum if we leave. We're barely engaged as it is. We're not even at the peace talks.
Do you think it would be important to or a good plan would just be to kind of go in there, help them out, set them up with a good starting point, and then kind of just leave them be, as opposed to?
Yeah, I think.
Do things require maintenance? That's my question.
It requires empowering local. It requires two things, in my opinion. It requires the stomach of the American people to understand that when we leave these countries after 100 years of propping them up, there's going to be bad things that happen, and countries that will take over that do not have our best interest at heart.
Right.
100% agree with that. Yeah. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and that's already happening. I mean, Iran and Turkey and Saudi Arabia and these little countries like Yemen and Syria already are taking over. And that's so it first has the public will has to be there. The public has to be educated. And the public has to give a shit first and foremost. And secondly, we have to not re-engage when those things happen and understand that. Like, I think China's model has been really good for China. What China does is it goes into Africa and Pakistan and Afghanistan, and it invests in local projects. It builds football stadiums. It builds and basically they're putting financial resources into making the lives of the community better, while putting businesses and jobs in those places like Nigeria, where there's 250 million people, instead of dropping bombs. But the American attitude, according to polling, is we care deeply about helping people in third world countries who are suffering, and the best way we can help them is by dropping bombs on them. Yeah. That is an actual piece of polling from Pew Research.
So how do you, Andrew, feel like, because the first thing I saw as soon as the whole Syria thing went down, the most recent Syria thing went down, was everybody flipping out that World War III was going to start, and that, you know, this means bad news for us, and like people just getting completely terrified in that like groupthink mentality. How do you feel about Facebook and, like, I guess because we've talked with Chris on the podcast before about how the news cycle kind of pushes an agenda and it freaks everybody out. Like, because I even I did my research and realized that it wasn't the end of the world as soon as that happened, and just Russia being mad at us doesn't mean that we're going to all die tomorrow. But it just, how do you feel about the social media impact of those kind of news stories and things like that?
Yeah, I think it highlights how lazy Americans have become with their news intake. It's just half the people will admit right away that they don't read past the headline. Right. So you'll have inflammatory headlines that have nothing to do with the article that just kind of make you think it's saying one thing. I think that's what it is. It just highlights the apathy of Americans towards their news and their willingness to actually find the news, you know.
Right.
What would you Go ahead. What would you guys say to basically? So, like, I saw something on Facebook that kind of like intrigued some, thought or whatever. It's just like, so I saw a tweet. I'm not even sure who exactly posted it, but it said something along the lines of, "How would we feel as Americans if Syria and/or Russia decided to bomb us over the poisoning of kids in Flint, Michigan?"
Oh, that's actually interesting.
Oh, sorry. I was just trying to share the podcast and spread the wealth, and I'm being unprofessional.
No, you're fine.
I think it is a funny idea, okay? But there's intent behind one and incompetence behind the other.
Right.
100%.
Yeah. Assad wants to gas 150,000 people, kills 100, and then 130,000 move out of that territory, and then he can claim, I've captured this territory.
Wow.
In Flint, Michigan, and so much of the American government, it's so big, so unwieldy, the consequences of bad actors and bad incentives aren't fulfilled. And so it just becomes an incompetent maze. And I think this goes back to the last point. You, as a voter, as a taxpayer, have to take responsibility for the action that is happening in your community. We have a series on our podcast called The Cost, which is the human toll of government policy, where we basically tell you what happens when government policy is enacted. People get hurt. People get killed. One episode 91 of We Are Libertarians, this mother of two kids, she's 27 years old. Her boyfriend is too stoned to sell some pills, so she makes the drop for him. She goes to jail for 16 years for selling 2 Oxycontins.
Jesus.
She has a rare blood disease. She dies in prison because we have given a contract to a company called Corizon to manage the health care. They're beholden to shareholders, so to maximize profit, they cut care. It kills this woman. And 100 people in the prison system are in a place where they could help her. They watch her die because they don't want to step out of the system.
Jesus.
You, as a taxpayer in Indiana, are morally complicit in that. You an American taxpayer and voter are morally complicit in the dropping of bombs in Syria when children are killed. We are funding rebels with weapons that cause the more we intervene in Syria, the more children get gassed. And so it's not enough to go, this is too confusing, I don't understand. You have a duty to understand.
Yes.
And that's why you have a duty to listen to We Are Libertarians at WeareLibertarians.com or the American Morning Podcast, because people like us will do the complicated 20 hours of research to give you the 2-hour distillation of what's actually going on.
That
is the Monday American Podcast, just not to correct you. But.
Sorry, that's okay.
That's a good point.
It's funny, actually. A lot of people make that mistake. I never anticipated that. It's my lack of branding knowledge, I guess.
That's a good point, though. I think it's easy for people that don't do their research and don't really care enough to like really be pulled into just a phrase. Like, I saw that phrase that I said floating around the internet, and I really don't have a stance on it because I don't exactly understand completely what's going on. But I think it's easy for people to just see that and then be like, that's what I agree with.
Right.
And then instead of doing any kind of research, they just flock to a phrase or flock to the easiest thing it is for them to compare something with or, to go with. And it just, that seems like it's easy. So I'll just go with that.
Yeah, that's what it's become to me. It's just like Chris said, they find it too confusing. They don't want to put the effort into it. They become apathetic or they just give up. And like you said, they find the phrase and that's good enough for them.
And that's what I feel like when I am, at least in my mind, I feel like when I get on there, I try to at least get to the middle. Like I'm not going to go to the extents that you guys go. And that's why I appreciate having you guys as friends and able to, I feel like, listen to you and see what you guys put out there in the podcast world and on the internet, because if it wasn't for you guys, it would make my job a little bit harder. And like I said, I'm good at being like average on this kind of stuff.
Right.
And I feel like I have a pretty good moral compass as well as Shane. Shane's very right or wrong. My problem is I see the both sides of a lot of things. So.
I'm the same way, I think. I just like when I don't understand something, I just flock to facts.
Yeah.
So as soon as I don't understand, I just go to whatever I read and or like, so if I see something for like someone would see that and go, okay, that's what I believe now.
Yeah.
I would go and try to find something that either goes against with that phrase,
disproves it.
Yeah. So I can get kind of both sides and see how I feel about the thing as a whole, as opposed to one side.
Let me stop you guys there because you're using both sides.
Yeah.
And let me say that human interactions are very complex.
Mm-hmm.
If Juice and I are mad at each other, there's two sides to that story, but there's many shades of complexity. Our personal histories with our mother, for instance, a lot of, I may be acting out of self-interest or I may be acting in these different ways. And governments are just a collection of human beings. And the news is a very complex thing, but people try to distill it down into left versus right for a few reasons. Some people use it to manipulate. Mm-hmm. Some people want you to buy into a binary thinking because it's easier to manipulate that way. If somebody, and this is a good litmus test, if somebody is making an enemy out of someone, then they are manipulating you. Mm-hmm. If you are listening to a podcast and they are, the left is wrong, the left is the enemy, or Donald Trump is the enemy, they are manipulating you to join their team, their tribe.
Right.
And studies show that people will believe things that are untrue just to maintain status in a social circle, in a tribe, because we are pack animals. And so it goes back to our prehistoric brain. I would encourage your audience, start with understanding psychology, your own personal thinking, and the way that people communicate before you dive into politics. Because once you do that and you realize you can break down and pick apart what people are saying, then you go, okay, they're not telling the truth. They may not have all the facts. Maybe they're intentionally lying. Maybe they're ignorant. Who knows? But they're not right, because it just becomes easier, because the world is a very complex place, and that is part of what intimidates us. Mm-hmm. We like order. We don't like chaos. So we buy into slogans because they're easier for our brain to understand, because it's less calories to process it.
I could almost compare that to like an everyday situation that someone might go through. And like I said, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it would be easy for people to understand this if you say say you have a friend and that friend tells you that this guy that you've never met is not a good person, I don't for these reasons, and you go ahead and dislike that person as well just because he said that he doesn't like them. So I think that's similar kind of to what you're saying, and just and a different way to look at it. But so you're basically, getting your information from that person instead of actually you meeting the person and going through situational stuff and getting your own idea of that person.
Here's a great book to read. It's about dating, and a lot of your listeners are probably single guys like mine. It's called, I don't know if it's called Mate or if it's called What Women Want Now, but it's by Tucker Max, who wrote the I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell books.
Yep.
And
that one.
with Jeffrey Miller with a G, who is an evolutionary psychologist. And they wrote a book about what women find attractive. How can you make yourself attractive? It's not about netting and all this. It's about being the best version of yourself.
Right.
And here's the aspects that go into being a successful person based on evolutionary psychology. And I think that's a really good place to start in an easy, short read to understand what people find attractive. Because the art of seduction, the art of power all start with attraction.
Right.
And so I think that's a really good place to start.
And one thing that I wanted to bring up is a lot of the times I don't post anything that I think politically or on an intelligent side of things because I'm terrified that I'm going to be completely wrong and people are going to call me on it, and then I'm going to look it up later and find out, oh yeah, I was completely wrong about
So what?
that. And the issue that I have though is I look at my Facebook memories and like show that what I was talking about 6 or 8 years ago, and I was like, I need to delete that off of there because that just makes me look like a complete moron that I thought this,
It also
this thing.
shows that you've come to realize that what you were saying then was not the smartest thing. And I mean, at least you can look at it that way. Like, I've come this far since then. At least you're not still thinking that way and don't even, ignorance is bliss type deal.
Yeah, everybody's.
I think-
Go ahead. Sorry.
I think one of the best character strengths that anyone can have is the ability to, first of all, know when to say and when not to say something, but also when to be able to admit, like, yeah, I was wrong, and I have since been shown some facts or some ideas, whatever, had a conversation that says this or that has made me change my mind, and now I think this or that, and that you can kind of you're willing to admit that you were wrong.
I would even agree that the majority of society doesn't have that, instilled in them, that they're like, how many people do you know that just are never wrong?
But
Exactly.
You're not born right. Like you every piece of knowledge in your head comes from some social interaction. You talking to another person or listening to a podcast or reading a book, and like that adds to your knowledge base. So if you say something, even if you don't know if it's completely true, you can say, I'm questioning this. What do you guys think? And then people will tell you, and then you can pick and choose from there. But don't be afraid to speak out because you're gonna be wrong.
And then have that, like, be able to go back to the drawing board and think about what the information that was just given to you, and then come back and have a different idea, as opposed to just, no, that's not what I believe, and I'm not going to agree with any of that, and this is how I was taught to think, and this is how I'm going to think for the rest of my life.
Yeah, and the flip side of that, what I also want to build is stronger stances on things. So I do need to do my research. I need to, learn about how the current, political, what is it? Wave is good. I don't know. Anyways, basically, I just need to have a stronger stance because that would improve I feel like my podcast and improve my voice in social media, improve things if I just would take a stronger stance, even if I am maybe wrong. I'm at least arguing my point, I guess, is what I'm saying. And I feel like I go into things too often where I'm like, well, I see both sides of things.
Well,
so
there's definitely
I can't really
something to be
argue.
said about someone who is sure of what they're saying, and like that's very something I look for when I get my information, is like when someone doesn't really seem sure about what they're saying, and they're like, and they're kind of like contradicting themselves, and I think it's like, if I'm gonna listen to anybody, it's gonna be someone who like you can visually see, and the way that they're talking. And I would say that about you is that you're very, like, when you say something, you can tell you mean it,
and your confidence. Like the problem with that sometimes though is you'll run into people that are completely confident about something and they'll be able to convince you, but then they're just feeding you a bunch of bullshit.
If I were Tommy Lauren and I were that sure of my nonsense, I would be so much richer than I already am.
And that's much, much more attractive as well.
Yeah. Never mind.
Well, also when you see people that, like what you're talking about, when they're just not saying anything that has any kind of, like,
like substance.
Yeah, I mean, those are just people that are kind of like sociopaths. They just believe their own lies. You know what I mean? So
And I think I do that sometimes.
I think people need to, and I'm totally spacing on your other guest. I'm sorry, dude. But I don't know about his reading diet. But here's what I'd say: just start easy. Just go read the New York Times website every day.
Right.
Go to Reason.com. Go to the National Review website and go to Think Progress. Just start with those different views and maybe the Atlantic. And you're going to 5 websites a day. You're getting the mainstream opinion of news. You're getting Reason, which is a libertarian alternative. You're getting National Review, which is a conservative site. Think Progress, which is a left site. And then the Atlantic, which is kind of another independent view. And like, you just have to spend 10 minutes a day going to 5 websites, and they don't update that much stuff. It's not that hard. It's just people don't know where to begin, and you just got to start somewhere to go.
And
you got to cross-check your stories and kind of be able to read between the lines to figure out what's actually going on.
Andrew, do you have anything that you follow that you would like to share as well to maybe add to that list?
I like to go to Reuters. I do like Reuters. No, I mean, those ones pretty much hit it, though. I mean, it's just I try to get as many different views of the same story as I can, regardless of where it is.
What's your guys' process? Because you guys talk about, I know that it's a very short amount of time, but when do you look that stuff up? Is it free time, or is it just like how do you go about getting your information?
Go ahead, Andrew.
I guess when I hear about a story, that's when I just start just going through different websites.
Yeah, and digging into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I start with the cultural conversation. What is everybody talking about? What are the headlines? And then I start there. And so when I'm putting my show together, last week we talked about Starbucks and Syria, and we talk about what everybody's talking about because I want to give people first and foremost the facts about what's actually happening. And so we start with the facts. Here's what we know based on reporting from the New York Times, the Washington Post, the AP, Reuters. And then I go, okay, what are opinion makers saying about it? And then that's when I go to a variety of opinion sites, left, conservative. The Intercept is great. It's left-leaning but very independent. Reason, National Review, like I said, The Atlantic. I will do a Google search based on that. I will, if I'm thinking as I'm reading that and I'm going, why did this happen this way? I will write the question into Google, and then it'll pop up a bunch of different stories that I can look at. And then I form my opinion based on all that different research. I probably spend 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes at night just looking over stuff.
Right.
And that, based on my years of kind of being involved in stuff, I have a base of knowledge. So it might take some people, but 15 minutes in the morning as you're on the
checking your Facebook your
or
Twitter,
whatever.
or your Instagram.
I also listen to a lot of news podcasts through the day.
Right.
You go to the news section, and I get most of my information from podcasts. I think Ben Shapiro on the right. The Pod Save America guys are Democracy Now! On the left. Libertarian is We Are Libertarians.
Yep.
And then some news stuff. Like there's a website like Politico has great podcasts. The Hill, Roll Call, like these kind of political sites give you a lot of good information too. Just kind of scroll through the top 100 and see what looks interesting in news and politics.
Do you guys ever find the thing that I've gotten annoyed about recently is people wanting to get that story out there first, so then I'll hear it on a podcast, or we'll even do something on our podcast about a story, and then I'll get annoyed because I'll 2 or 3 days later, extra news or extra details will come out, and then it makes the point of view that I was thinking about completely different.
Right.
And then I'm like, well, I wish I could do this podcast every day so I could go back and be like,
right,
hey, what I was saying yesterday, just forget that shit. Don't listen to that.
Maybe just the only thing that you could do is just tell the importance of telling the listeners that this news
is
and when you're hearing it is very new, and we don't know all of the details, but I'm sure more will come out. I mean, typical newscast. You hear a newscaster say that all the time. They're always like, we don't have all the specifics right now, and I'm sure more will come out later, and blah, blah, blah. I think that's just important to kind of say those things, so when people do hear it, they're not thinking that you're, saying not taking into consideration the new facts that have come out since.
Yeah, people are very forgiving of that.
Right.
I mean, they understand.
And so then this leads to another question that's off the list of notes. So I hope it's as interesting as I think it is. So if you guys are listening to something, for example, Chris, you from the Libertarian Party, if somebody is either writing or recording something and you're listening to it, does it skew your view of the story at all because they're from the side that you kind of agree with, or is it? And how does that work for you?
No, I start with I really don't listen to a lot of libertarian podcasts for that reason. I want to be different, and I think I am because I don't want to be an echo chamber. I think to not become an echo chamber, you have to decide I'm not going to just share what everybody else is sharing or have the same opinions.
Do you think you would become like biased a little bit if you continue just to listen to the same information from if you did it that way? I
think if you only listen to Reason's podcast or Jason Stapleton or me, then I think maybe you'd become biased. I'm just so strong-headed and independent that like libertarians hate me more than conservatives and Democrats.
I've noticed that with your like tweets and your Facebook posts sometimes that like you're calling them out because they're coming after you.
Yeah, so I just am a very independent-minded person, and I've always been that way, and I will always be that way. But I think if you just read, like, you start with the facts. Here's what this says, and then give yourself some space to think about that. And then you judge what other people are saying. I think you have to realize we're pack creatures. What other people say does influence you. So you have to kind of watch out for that. And it's not important to be contrarian. It's important to be independent thinking.
Yeah.
So don't just say the opposite of what everybody's saying to be different, because that's equally as stupid.
And Andrew, I know that you've in the middle of your podcast have said, hey, I might have a little bit of a bias towards this direction. How do you feel when you're doing your shows and you're presenting the history? Do you feel like some of that bias leaks through? And obviously it does, because you've said it in your show that, hey, this is my personal opinion about it.
Yeah, I mean, history is inherently biased because someone is writing it. They have a bias, and the best historians or the best recorders of history are able to put aside their own bias as much as possible in order to report on what is happening in front of them, so that we can later look at, as much as we can, get unbiased version of what happened. I think when I said my own biases, I'm pretty sure you're probably talking about my feelings towards the French.
Yes, that was exactly what you were talking about.
Yeah, I am a World War II buff, and it's always interested me so much. And the way they handled themselves in both World War II and Vietnam has given me such a bad taste in my mouth for their nation, historically speaking, that I'm way too hard on them, and I know I shouldn't be. But I am willing to admit, like, hey, this is me being just kind of a douchebag to the French. So
based on their
take it with a grain of salt.
on their performance, I feel like some people might not even know they were involved in those wars.
Right.
That made me so happy to hear. Yeah, I mean, I have to pause for a second when I'm doing like on an unscripted rant in the middle of my episode and just like, so, what I just said was probably pretty harsh and unfair based on my own bias. Go do your own research. I hope you agree with me.
Was it okay? You guys can tell me this. Was it Korea or Vietnam that they at one point had a big influence and basically controlled them?
It was Vietnam.
Yeah, so
it was Vietnam, yeah.
It's hard for me to even think that they, controlled someone at some point.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. They really didn't, because the Vietnamese people, and you can get this, and I've got 2 episodes out of the Vietnam War. I probably will have 2 more, working on the 3rd one right now. But the Vietnamese people, they were fighting against some form of aggressor for thousands of years before the French got there. And it was kind of instilled in their nature to be the aggressed people fighting for their independence. And the French, they made all the worst mistakes they could make as far as trying to colonize them, which then we came in right after them and made the very same mistakes. So,
and the same with Hitler. I feel like he completely kind of wiped them out and ended their say in the war with just like a flick of his wrist kind of thing.
Well, they thought that there was this one part. Okay, so in
The
World War,
Maginot Line.
yeah, the Maginot Line was built to protect France from Germany after World War One. And that extended from France all the way into Belgium, except for this one part of the Ardennes forest where it's really like a lot of trees, very dense. And they said, there's no way that they will come through there. And they came through there real quick, and they got a big head start, and they were totally outmatched, and they folded like as soon as the war started.
Yeah,
I mean, really they were supposed to last like 5 or 6 years. What pisses me off the most about that is, you're exactly right. They just basically said, that's fine. They won't come through that way. That was exactly how they came through in World War One. Right. The very same way they said, they won't come through that way. So that's why I was like, you have got to be kidding me.
That's like the not learning from your mistakes guy.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
So the thing that I would also like to see or hear from you guys is, what do you think is coming in the future? Do you think that it's even, because people were talking about the Syria thing and Russia and things like that being like a Cold War? I don't even think it's possible for, a Cold War to happen with the way technology is now, is it? Is it possible?
I think it's more possible than not, just because of the magnitude of the weapons we have. No one wants to really use them.
Right.
I totally agree. I think we are in some ways safer than we've ever been, but also much more in much more peril because we have weapons. You see what happened just go watch some documentaries on what the dropping of the bomb in World War II on Nagasaki, and it's absolutely horrifying. And we have bombs that are, order of magnitude much stronger.
There's like exponentially stronger.
Yeah, and we have the ability to really wipe out the planet. We have a lot of challenges facing us in the future. You have the threat of nuclear war. You have drug-resistant bacteria. You have the deforestation of the Amazon and Indochina. You have lack of water. You have, they always used to talk about peak oil, but that seems to have disappeared. So there's always a lot of threats, and there's always a lot of problems ahead. Global warming, obviously. You look at what's the Italian city with all the water canals?
Venice.
That's right.
Venice is 180 days out of the year covered underwater in the parts that it's not supposed to be.
Right.
So climate change is real,
and the effect of earthquakes and stuff like that because of global warming.
Because what happens is you have these big forest fires and the deforestation for palm oil, for instance, and all that soot rises, settles on the polar ice caps. It's black snow. It collects more heat. It drops more and more water and ice from Greenland and the poles into the ocean. And so that's a huge problem. The humans are very scrappy, though. We are a very scrappy people. But I do
compared to dinosaurs and
right. I think you have to be optimistic about the future because you watch Vice, you go, oh wow, there's a lot of problems, but there's also a lot of victories. So we do have a lot of problems facing us. I do think that technology, as long as we don't let AI go too far, right, because the Terminator's a real thing.
I completely believe
it's a real thing. The problems with AI are not only include machines that have thinking abilities, and then they might start thinking that we're the problem.
Right.
It's also unemployment. We could have 50% unemployment by 2025.
Right.
Some people are estimating, and when you have half a population in the world not working because of technology, that's a huge issue. And we haven't identified that as the real issue. We blame immigration. We blame NAFTA. We blame the things that are not responsible for, the loss of our industries.
It's almost like kind of crazy to think that I go on monster.com or Indeed or something like that, and you see all these driver jobs, CDL, this and that. You know how close we are to computers and machines driving down the road with semis, everything being transferred from city to city through.
Right.
And that's crazy to think all those jobs. Think my dad's a driver. He drives a roll-off truck. And think about all these jobs that are going to be gone just from that one little, drivers.
And it'll start short. It'll start like, oh, the driver only needs to be in the vehicle. It doesn't actually have to operate the vehicle. And then they're like, oh, he only has to be in there for part of the time to make sure that things don't go wrong.
What's the movie? It's a space. He goes in, he goes into space. No. It's but basically there's self-driving semis in the movie.
It's I think it's Moon.
Are you talking about Logan?
Yeah, and they try to kill the farmers, right?
I think it was like there was like a wreck. The horses got loose on the highway, and they were trying to get the horses out of the way of the autonomous semis.
Yeah, and it was almost like, so these people wouldn't give up their farmland in Logan, and they were saying that the semis might be trying to like inadvertently run them over or whatever. So I just thought it was kind of crazy to get a glimpse of what it might look like, because didn't have like a cab or anything. It was just like a moving, bus looking type thing.
The one thing that I would say about this is that people don't realize how fragile everything is and how fragile human networks are. And that's why it's incredibly important for each and every one of us as individuals to understand that we do play a role in all of this. Everything that you say, everything that you tweet, everything that you talk about is an extension of your values and can have an impact on the world. And even if it's a collective, Syria in 2013, we didn't go into Syria in 2013 or Libya because people tweeted at such a large amount at politicians that they realized the will wasn't there to go in. So we do have the ability to influence these larger networks in a positive or negative way. And so I think when people think that, it's too big, the system's too big, we can't do it. Elizabeth Warren was a professor who wrote this thing that got put into the Dodd-Frank bill, and then she became a senator. Now she's thinking about running for president. She was nobody 10 years ago.
Right.
There are so many stories where you're a nobody and they just turn out to change the world. I think there are
Elon Musk.
We have to take responsibility for our own behavior instead of blaming other people. That's why we're all so violent about identity politics right now. It's because it's easier to blame other groups than to take responsibility for what you're not doing.
Right.
So the things like the Syria situation, 100 years ago they were saying nothing new will ever be invented. We're the most technologically advanced society of all time. There's no way that we could possibly have any more wars. We've solved the problems of war. And then all of a sudden we immediately slid into World War I because of entangling alliances like Syria. Don't be arrogant. And take responsibility for yourself and also for your community and society at large. And I think it is possible to have a good future, but you, the listener, have to decide that you want that.
Right.
Yeah.
So back to the nuclear war thing that you said is something that's a potential. What kind of act or thing would happen that you think would actually be used?
That's a hard question to answer.
Because I mean, we've seen the gassing and we bombed them, but we didn't drop a reference.
We didn't
drop a world ender on them.
A reference would be what causes us to use them the last time, and I mean, what can we learn from that? I guess it's not very easy to answer the question because
I was just curious if there was.
But just
the last time we used it, we were looking at invading mainland Japan. We expected to have 1 million casualties on the landing of that battle. We were already dropping bombs. Yeah, I mean, literally the low end projections were we will lose 1 million people within the first week or so to secure the beachhead. We were looking at a country that was preparing its entire civilian population as soldiers to fight against us. We were looking at
goosebumps.
We were already bombing them with incendiary bombs that were destroying their cities in chunks overnight anyways, and had higher casualty rates in a day or two than the bombs did instantly, and they would burn and kill them slowly. I mean, to be able to use that as your reference, it's like good. I mean, Jesus, what would have to happen now?
And would it be fair to say that the space race had a lot to do with the evolving of bombs that we had and whatnot? Because of once Soviet Union launched Sputnik, put America in a frenzy a little bit.
Well, that's the huge argument now that nobody talks about is everyone's trying to get supremacy from the air, but air meaning space. And so the ability to launch missiles from space onto mainland. I think with the nuclear question, there's two examples here. The first is North Korea. And you have entangling alliances there with Japan, South Korea, America, and China. They all have a vested interest in there not being nuclear war. Kim Jong-un is smart enough to realize that to maintain his power, he needs nuclear weapons, but to use nuclear weapons would immediately end him,
Right.
and would bring about the death of millions, 5 to 10 million people on a peninsula with, 50 million people, I think it is. And so he's a rational actor. People think Kim Jong-un is nuts. He's not. He's a very smart individual. He was raised and taught in Switzerland. He's a very rational person who wants to maintain his power, and that's why you see the move towards peace from him. But then you look at Syria, where the use of chemical weapons. You had chemical weapons in the possession of Mubarak in Egypt and Gaddafi in Libya. They did not use them. Assad used them. Mubarak and Gaddafi are dead. Assad is alive and in power. And so it just goes down to how far is a person willing to go to maintain their own life and power. And I think in Un's case, he's smart enough to realize that there's some rumors that he wants to liberalize the country and move like China did from communism to a hybrid. And he wants to open up a little bit. And then there's Assad, who is just an animal. Like,
Right.
he is literally a monster and is willing to destroy everything, his entire country, to make sure that he does not die. And so with the nuclear question, if Assad had nuclear weapons, he probably would have used them in some form or fashion
Already.
which would have prompted a response from Israel, certainly, and probably America, which would have prompted another response from Russia, who has nuclear weapons. Iran is suspected to have some nuclear capabilities, and Turkey's probably working on them too. So it's how far does it spiral out of control, and how far is willing someone to push that?
Yeah.
I also think it has to do a lot with motive. Like Hitler had this whole, I'm probably like cleansing the world type thing and getting rid of, genocide and all this stuff. So I feel like not anybody really today, besides the guy that you had mentioned, has a motive like that and doesn't really have the smarts and whatnot to like realize what you said if they decide to use any of this stuff. Pretty much. So
I mean, I don't know if Andrew agrees with my assessment, but historically, it's how far is one human willing to go to destroy another?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't agree with that at all. I don't disagree with that at all. I'm sorry.
Do you guys? Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say there's a funny theme that runs through history that is major actions and the way that they got started by one person's small action.
Oh wow. And that goes back to that ties in with the Twitter comment that you could make a huge difference in a larger network just by going in one direction.
Sirhan in World War I assassinates Archduke Ferdinand. It sets off something.
Exactly.
The Tunisian fruit vendor who set off the Arab Spring, who was tired of being harassed by the local police, lit himself on fire, and it set off the Arab Spring. That nearly 8 years later, we're still seeing the fallouts. I mean, the history has a funny way of taking very small people and turning them into very big actors.
And my imagination runs wild, guys. So if this is completely stupid, let me know. But is it possible to think that there might be somebody that takes on a because with your background in history, Andrew, and Chris, I know that you're versed in history as well. There was in our history of the world, there's always been people trying to take over as much as they can. Is that possible now? Like, is it possible that there might be somebody that's like, hey, I want to run the world and I want to take over everything?
Andrew?
Maybe not in the sense we've seen it before.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to have a Napoleon or a Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, but you could have someone who takes over the EU and centralizes his power with that, and then they kind of absorb more nations into it. That's how I'd see it. But not the traditional land conquering that we've seen in the past.
Right. Yeah, Putin is a great example, and Xi in China is a great example of this, but Putin is probably the more stark example of someone who consolidates power in their country, tries to move into Georgia, tries to move into the Ukraine, tries to affiliate, but the wealth of the world, the power militaristically of the world is so distributed now. The Americans, as much as I am a non-interventionist, you have to look back at the 20th century and say there was a lot wrong with the CIA and a lot wrong with interventions, but the United States of America tried to distribute the wealth around the world and the military power to make sure that we maintained supremacy. There's no doubt that we have done things to maintain supremacy, but there is a capitalist spirit that says it is in the world's best interest for other people to be rich. That's what NAFTA is about. That's what TPP is about. Go ahead.
I had Justin on my podcast a while ago, but I think it was there that I mentioned, we're the first nation in the history of humanity that has not taken the power that we have relatively and used it to conquer as much as we can.
Yeah.
When we really could have done that, fairly easily at some points.
Yeah. Now we wouldn't be able to do that, but at some point, like you just said, we would have definitely had the upper hand in doing so.
We toppled Saddam twice in a month. In 1 month, we toppled the Taliban in a month. We toppled. We could topple Assad in a day. I mean, we sometimes in Obama, I think, was largely responsible for this. And you can think it's good or bad, but Obama really tried to move away from American exceptionalism and move us to moral equivalency. So there's a moral equivalency between Luxembourg and the United States and Estonia, and conservatives go, that's ridiculous. And it is true. Like in the gun debate, when you see all these other developed nations don't do this, it's like, yeah, they have 5 million people. Right. Okay? They're not the same. It's not the same numbers. The math isn't the same.
Right.
And so I think we've lost sight of how powerful the American, California is the 8th largest economy. Texas is like the 12th largest economy in the world.
Wow.
And so we have massive amounts of economic and military power, but we have tried, I think, as a nation over the last the last century to distribute that. So there is that mutually assured destruction. But I think there is, and that's what Trump is about. Hey, stop that. We're losing too much money. We're losing too many opportunities. We're losing too many jobs. But I get that impulse, and I would like to. I agree with it in a lot of ways. I'd like to see us become more nationalist and stop trying to control the world for our best interest. But
and this is like I said, I'm a very uneducated about the history and things like that. That's why I like having you guys on here. This is just another silly question that popped in my head. If this was a video game, or if this was like the board game, what's that where you try to conquer each other? Risk. If this was Risk or like a game, would America be the first team that you would try to pick, or would there be something else?
Without a doubt.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah,
hell
without
yeah.
a doubt.
I like that answer.
It would be like starting in Monopoly with all of the blue built out to the very top, all of the green built out to the very top. Yeah. I mean, you're starting with such a huge advantage.
Right.
And I think we're in real danger of losing that advantage. We're looking at insolvency in the 2030s because of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and that threatens us in a big way. And I will say, if you go back and look at Osama bin Laden, watch The Looming Tower on Hulu. It's great. And so I've read a lot on Osama bin Laden, and Osama bin Laden's goals to defeat America. He was angry about our military adventurism and going into places like Kuwait instead of letting Saudi Arabia and the Mujahideen handle it. And he declared war on us. His stated goal was draw the Americans into more military interventionism so they will continue to make more mistakes. They will bleed money. There will become internal strife because of economics and just by virtue of the way that war works. And it will eventually collapse the government from the inside because of it. Right. And I think we're in great danger of letting Osama bin Laden win because we spend too much money, we invade too many countries, and we don't take his warning seriously, because he saw us over a period of the 20th century make these mistakes and said, "Okay, I figured it out. I know how to topple these guys," and we're well on our way to letting Osama bin Laden win if we don't get our monetary problems fixed.
Right.
We will be morally. We will have the equivalency of other countries if we don't.
All right. I feel like we've kind of like exhausted a lot of subjects. What I want to do before everybody kind of gets out of here and we get Andrew off the phone. Andrew, go ahead and just tell all the listeners where to find you, what they can. Sorry, man. I need to get more professional at this. I apologize. But tell everybody where they can find you, where they can listen to your podcast, and also just if you have anything else you want to plug, anything else, just let us know.
The best place to go, I think, would be on my website. It's themondayamerican.com. You can listen to all the episodes there, find all the links for all the podcasts and social media, Facebook, Twitter. But anywhere you listen to a podcast, you should be able to find The Monday American. And
I thoroughly appreciate you coming on to do this show because, like I said, we have a lot of fun and like to make the dick and fart jokes as much as possible. But an episode like this, it's an education for me, and it actually motivates me to like try to expand my horizons and learn a little bit more about the world and how it works.
Hey, I do a lot of dick and fart jokes on my podcast too. So I mean, we do politics with dick and fart jokes. So.
Absolutely. But thanks
I appreciate you letting me come on and have some current relevancy rather than historical.
Yeah, and you're welcome to come on again as soon as possible. Just let me know, okay?
I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
All right.
Smart guy.
Yeah, I love his podcast. Like I said, I can't give him enough credit that it's so, I mean, it's just well produced. Like, I don't know how to like even go about saying it because like I love Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. Mm-hmm. Like it just like puts me into history the way I like it. Like it's a story, and that's fun. That's what he does.
I just got a kick out of talking about just the Cold War, World War II, World War I. That stuff's like really fun. If you know just even a little bit about it, it's fun to talk about it.
Yeah, there's another podcast called My History Can Beat Up Your Politics you might check out because it's a lot like that too.
That's awesome.
Yeah, you cannot talk about current events without really understanding the past, and you realize the long arc of history is just all these individual choices. Every person makes choices.
Right.
A lot of individual choices add up to big events, and you see that as you study history.
And once again, also, Chris, thank you for coming on doing the show.
Sure.
It's awesome having you on here. And just the same thing that I said to him, when I listen to your podcast, I get entertained and I learn something. And I feel like a lot of people like to listen to podcasts just for the strict entertainment and the ridiculousness of the hosts, which I feel like is a good plus. But also when I learn something, I feel like that's awesome. And I can actually look it up and see what you guys are talking about.
This is all very complex. People think it's complex. It is. I'm just trying to make it simple for people.
Right. And that's like the best way to go about news or any kind of like political stuff, because like I said, I am your average person. Like I'm the person that, you know, I look at something, I have no idea really what's going on, but I'm gonna do my best to try to figure it out. And I just love having these kind of podcasts as well as the ones where we just go off the rails and talk about whatever. Because if you could tell from the questions I was asking, those pop in my head as I'm talking.
I would say you two both exhibit something that you probably shouldn't do as much, which is you don't give yourself the benefit of the doubt. And you think you know less than you really do,
right?
And I think you know it's like we shouldn't be surprised that he understands anything about history. Like I think there is everybody is more informed than they realize. They're just so disgusted with it that they don't engage with it.
Right.
See, I would just say with me that it's important that I need time in between sentences to think about what I'm talking about. It's not even, I'm not very good off the cusp, I mean, maybe when it comes to dick and fart jokes, but when it comes to actually talking about this stuff, I have to think about, you know, and go back through my mind and realize what I do know.
Right.
And I can't, like, I don't have any, I don't desire to get in a conversation with someone about this stuff that knows a lot about it. I mean, obviously this is a good platform because you're telling us, as opposed to we're not having like a debate. And I would hate to get into like a debate with someone and just throw out random, you know, facts that I know. But I do feel like I know some things when it comes to
like I said, the only reason I'm surprised is because of the podcast that we do is like a lot of the times we're not talking about any of this. So then when I hear you like give a, you know, very poignant opinion, I'm just like, wow.
I'm just into that stuff. And when it comes to history, it's like he said, it's important that we remember what happened in history. And I agree with that. And I think that it's cool to just go back and like there's so many cool situations that happened in history that like nobody knows about, like you know, the Manhattan Project and just really cool. Anything like the invention of the hydrogen bomb, like things like that is just crazy. So.
Even if you're not a reader or you don't like podcasts or you don't want to read the news, I mean, if you want to understand history, there's a lot of great series out there that do a lot of good education in a roundabout way. Like I saw Chappaquiddick yesterday. It's a very factual. There's obviously some dramatic license, but I didn't understand what a complete scumbag Ted Kennedy was. I didn't know much about it until I saw it. I was like, holy cow. There's things like...
That's the one, was that the one the guy ran the car off the road?
Yes.
And
Ted
the
Kennedy.
woman died?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's things like The Wire on HBO. That is a documentary. Like, I don't care what anybody says. Like, if you watch The Wire, you have a full understanding of the complete failure of bureaucracy in the government system. That's how our government works at every local level.
Right.
And so if you make the effort to kind of watch some of this stuff, I mean, you do pick up a lot of cultural knowledge from watching historical based TV shows.
Right.
I definitely love myself a good documentary on any platform, whether it be, about, I watched one the other day about lions. It was just like, you know what I mean? And then all the way over to like political things or history. A good documentary is just one of my favorite things in the world, I'd have to say.
Yeah.
So what's the future for the We Are Libertarians? I mean, because you're just like a group, you're a conglomerate of stuff that you guys do.
We have it's 8 podcasts
Right.
at the moment. So it started out with just this one podcast in 2012, and I was working at the Libertarian Party, and it just continually evolves. And I am doing a lot of traveling for the first time, going to cover events, which is
That's
pretty
awesome.
cool. But I really feel like this is the best iteration of the show. There's been a bunch of different versions of We Are Libertarians. It always has changed over the nearly 300 episodes. And right now we're just really focused on, making you sound smart when you talk to your friends.
Right.
You give me 2 hours, you give me 4 hours a week, and I will I will help you understand what's going on in the news. And yes, I am biased. Yes, I do have an opinion, but I do try to be fair and try and not just shove one thing down. We're going to eventually get a studio and grow into like a daily show.
That's what, like, I was talking with a friend of mine from the Smugcast, BJ, and we're in that mode where we're like, this is a hobby, this is fun, but like we want to
Right.
turn it into something that's more than just that.
Yeah, there comes a point in podcasting where, and for me it was a hobby, and then somewhere along the line over the last 3 years, it was like, oh, I could do this for a living, and I really have always wanted to.
Right.
And then it becomes a job, and that's a very different switch for a podcaster to make, because then it goes from being fun and you have no pressure to now there's a lot of pressure, and I've got 100 Patreon subscribers that I feel a duty to, 7,500 downloads an episode. I feel a duty to those people.
Yeah.
I just feel a lot of duty, and it is different, but
I miss that.
I loved it.
yeah, but it's rewarding, and I just want to do more of that. And I think like focusing on the show and making that show better. The Chris Spangle Show is another podcast that I do, where I do a lot of teaching people about podcasting or stuff that doesn't quite fit with the We Are Libertarians format. And
Yeah,
so
I heard you did like a class where you went in and taught some kids about that.
Yep, I spoke about how I got into this mess, and I do. So I'm trying some experimental stuff on that feed too that I think is going to be pretty fun.
That's awesome.
Moving forward.
Well, like I said, I appreciate you coming in to do it. One of the things that I'm going to plug for us is advertisecast.com. So it's just like a website that people can go to, and they can see what I put out there as what I think it costs to advertise on the show. And then also it's got all of the contact information there that people can contact me personally, and we can work out something different. If you don't like any of the options on there, we'll work something out, obviously. And
Because we want to do this as a job.
right. It's advertisecast.com/juice in the morning.
Writing that down.
And but like I said, I've said it on my Facebook and Twitter pages the advertising is fairly cheap right now because I want you guys to take a chance with us. With the website, you can also, I feel like, see your return on investment because it forces the podcaster to fill out how many downloads the episode got that you advertised on. So you'll see how many people were touched by your advertisement. So because right now this podcast has been kind of sporadic lately because, you know, some episodes will get, like we had an episode get 1,300 downloads in a week. And it's still growing. It's getting even more now. But then, you know, we had one the other day that was like, you know, 400 or 500. So it's like, you know, and when I sent my stats to that advertised cast, it shows, you know, the weekly reach is 500, which is not accurate because it could be 1,600. It could be 500.
Yeah, that's why I do like I rarely do advertising. I really have focused on building a community. And once you start to focus on building a community, first and foremost, you do your show for yourself.
Yep.
And the people who are interested in what you're interested will flock around you. And then you network those people together, usually with Facebook groups, and build community. And then you'll get to a point where people go, how can I give you money?
Or how can I help? Yeah.
Yeah. And it was really like a surprising thing that happened in 2015 where people are like, I want to give you money. How do I do that?
Yeah.
I want to buy you equipment. And you're like, what? Like,
exactly.
But it is a thing. Like if you're a listener to this podcast and you'd miss it if it went away, then you have to financially support it because you guys are on a trajectory that I've been on where it gets to a certain point where it starts costing you $500 a month to do this.
Exactly.
And you can't afford to do it by yourself anymore. And you've got to say, listen, this is either going to stop or I need you to financially support us. And my audience has been more than generous and absolutely amazing. And the thing when you start taking Patreon subscribers too is like they get more invested in it too.
Right.
The
Because you're
community gets
creating
stronger.
individual content pretty much.
Yeah, yeah. So I think you should take a look at that too because I think your audience should support you because they're getting this for free.
Right.
Somebody's paying for it, and if you enjoy it, then donate it, you know, like on a Patreon or whatever.
Right.
So
Exactly. And like I said, you guys can find him anywhere that you listen to podcasts. The Chris Bangle Show, We Are Libertarians. What song do we have to end the podcast with today?
I was just gonna go with what we were gonna go with last week, but we did the yodel kid.
Very
so I was gonna do the Beastie Boys this time. If you're okay with that.
That's good. I like it.
Okay, and then it's like the song is called Slow and Low. So
Slow and Low.
I guess what you could take from that is just take your information that you get from the from politics and that kind of slow. Just take it,
take it slow. Do your research.
Yeah, and keep it on the low until you know what you're talking about, and then tell everybody.
And we hope you enjoyed this episode. And
hopefully the juice is worth the squeeze.
Boom.
This is Lynchburg, a small town in the heart of Tennessee, where families and neighbors work together to make every drop of our whiskey. If you can't get here, just look for one of our postcards. We send them all over. They look like this.
Let it flow! Let your stuff